This is Tom Osman, and you're listening to Whatever Comes Next. It's the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making, and today I am joined by Pete Rozsa and Joel Hansen, who are 2/5 of industrial crust-punk sludge metal group Prisoner, who are releasing their latest album, Putrid, Obsolete, on Persistent Vision Records on the 15th of March. The full lineup of the band is Pete on guitars, vocals, synth samples, Joel drums, synth and samples, and Dan Finn on guitars, vocals, Justin Hast bass vocals, and newest addition to the band, Adam Lake on synths, samples, and programming. If I was going to describe Putrid Obsolete, the kind of entry point way of thinking about it is I would say go to Through Silver and Blood by Neurosis. Think of the apocalyptic carnage that album evokes. That's the kind of feeling that I get from Putrid Obsolete. Attached to that, there is a strong industrial mechanized aspect, the programming that I mentioned, which does give a bit of a flavor of Godflesh or kind of Downward Spiral, Nine Inch Nails. Although, as we get into in the interview, that mechanized aspect of the band never fully takes over. So this is not a band that is entirely driven by program drums, for example. They are in there, but I think part of what makes the album so powerful and so impactful is the way that these mechanized aspects are almost kind of fighting with the organic side. And yeah, altogether it just produces an album that is incredibly powerful, and I absolutely love it. And so from that point of view, I was very excited to talk to Pete and Joel and get their insights on the band and on the album. So we get into talking about the album quite a bit. We talk a bit about their background and some of their plans for the future. And one other thing that I should mention is, following on from the release of this episode just a few hours later today will be the latest episode of Every Album Ever with Mike and Alex, where Mike and Alex will be discussing Putrid Obsolete. I like it to be a surprise, so I don't know what they thought of the album, but I'm pretty confident that they are going to be positive about it. And if you would like to support the podcast, then all I ask of you is that you subscribe at tomosman.substack.com. I have some other writings here, but at the moment it's all podcasts all the way, which you can skip to directly if you really want to be precise by going to tomosman.substack.com/podcast. You can follow me on all social media at Tom Osman Sounds, and I'm going to play you a little clip of one of the singles that's already out from the album Leaden Tomb, which is my introduction to the album, and I would still say it's maybe my favorite track of the album, although I love the whole thing, but it is a very impactful barrage, one of the album's briefest tracks, and it does the job in just over 3 minutes. And you can listen to the track in full at the end of the episode. And so now I will say, Pete and Joel, take it away. Hello, Joe.
Hey, Tom.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. How are you?
Pretty good. I went to the gym earlier and I pushed it really, really hard, so I'm feeling slightly delirious, but other than that, I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing well. I went to the gym yesterday and I'm feeling slightly sore, so we'll meet in the middle on that one.
You learn about what good pain versus bad pain is.
That's right.
Now, Pete, hi.
Hi.
Well, let's just get into talking about the band and talking about the album. So, um, listening to Putrid Obsolete, I think anyone would be able to hear that there are industrial elements, there are kind of death metal elements. I'd say there are crust punk elements, maybe some doom elements as well. So it's kind of hard to put the band in a box. But in terms of both of your formative years, were you punk kids or were you metal kids?
I don't know. I guess for me personally, I've been part of both those scenes. I like if we're going dichotomy of punk metal, I guess, like I like bands from both genres. I've always liked electronic music a lot too. And I don't know. It's sort of like over the years I've just played in uh some more strictly punk bands and also some bands that sort of blend styles together. And I feel like it's more it's always fun to play just like straight up hardcore punk or straight up any specific genre that doesn't blend things as much, but I feel like I get more out of it the more that I try to like make certain ideas work together, I guess, musically.
Yeah. I guess I never necessarily thought that there had to be such a division between punk and metal, but it keeps popping into my head the oh shit, what was it? The thing with Ryan Dunn, like Heavy Metal Evolution,
Yeah.
and he ends up
Yeah.
talking to oh shit, I've forgotten his name. The bass player from Iron Maiden. What the hell's his name?
Oh, now I'm just gonna Google it. I forget his name too.
He asks him if he was into punk.
That was Steve Harris.
Steve Harris, yeah, because he's like, oh, I think I hear like some punk elements in early Iron Maiden, and Steve Harris is very vehemently like, no, we hated punk.
I think that's so funny because I think it comes sometimes from where you grew up, like what scene and how you were surrounded with it. Like I'd imagine Steve Harris probably had a lot more distinct situations where he's able to quickly distinguish, well, this is a punk versus this is a metalhead. And like I
Yeah,
always thought that was honestly like funny to me coming like growing up because I remember when I was like middle school and I'm first playing music and I'm first falling in love with music and the idea of being playing it all the time. And like I didn't my dad I grew up in like my dad was a pastor. Just hearing metal and punk was like a revelation, no pun intended. So I just always thought it was funny when I would hear other people in heavy music circles talking shit in one or the other scene because I was like, both things are cool, right? Like, what's the problem? I don't get it.
yeah,
But it seems like if you're growing up in like I don't know, like some place, in New York or London or something in the 70s, like sure, that's going to mean a whole lot, or 80s or something. It might be a whole lot different than what I'm used to, like what I connect to these, but both were cool growing up for sure.
yeah. I guess kind of as you say, different people have different associations to the terms. Getting into Putrid Obsolete specifically, so there's a kind of there's an apocalyptic aspect to the album, and it makes me think of Through Silver and Blood by Neurosis, which is kind
Damn.
of like my benchmark apocalyptic metal album. Were they or are they an influence for the band?
Yes. 1000% yes. That's a high compliment, thank you.
So what do you get from Neurosis?
Oh man, I'll answer my with right the first thing that comes to mind, and then Pete, if you want to hit afterwards. Like the first thing that happens for me when I put on Through Silver and Blood or Times of Grace is everything else stops. So when you hear the title track and you hear like the sort of like the train kind of factory sample, and then suddenly the nothing else really exists at that point. And like I think a lot of times the best there's no objective, right? But like the music that, like, whether I'm playing it or you know, me and the buddies are playing it, or just your favorite album, like we're talking about here, is that time will stop the feeling of nothing else existing, and that's where you are. And it's certainly, I don't know, it's just it's canon. That album is canon. It's like always going to be through Silver and Blood. It's pretty much a perfect album.
Yeah, I mean that one in particular was definitely a game changer for me too, and just Neurosis generally in the 90s. They were just pushing that style of, like, you know, down tempo metal stuff into new territory that, like, they definitely picked up a lot of the industrial metal elements, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, Swans and Godflesh, and like that, like having more like focus on textures and
Yeah.
like noise to create sort of like an overall dark, upsetting vibe that I feel like we, you know, obviously took influence from that on this record. And, you know,
There's a lot of space on it too. Like that's a band where like I like love space, musical space. And like Jason Reeder's drumming on that record is also something that like is really important, because there's so much, he does this like on almost every record for them, but there's so much groove. And for a band that a lot of metalheads will come see, like, you know, I don't even know if he has a double bass pedal. It's just so there's so much space, like the idea of like Pete was saying, industrial connection. And I hear that through like these sort of like pseudo tribal, you know, sort of drums and stuff, but they give each other so much space. And I always thought that was such a contributing factor to how they are heavy.
No, I agree. The contrast of it, like they have parts which are quite ambient up to a point, and I think
Right.
that's also, maybe that was a connection that I made with Putrid Obsolete, is even though I forget how long it is, but like there's 4 or 5 tracks is just a barrage, and then you do have a couple of tracks where there is space, there is kind of ambience, and I definitely appreciated having that contrast to sort of accentuate the heaviness of the really full on parts. On that topic of the different kind of textures, something that I did want to ask you was about the samples and the programming that you use, because I've seen in the kind of lineup listings that I think, Pete, you're doing samples. In fact, Joel, you're doing samples as well. But if I'm not wrong, you more recently recruited Adam Lake. Is that right? He
Mm-hmm.
came into the band more recently. So what was the sort of the decision in getting someone who was going to be just devoted to synths and sampling and programming for your lineup?
What do you think? Pete Neurosis kind of helped that too a little bit.
yeah, I think we always wanted to do more with electronics, and like basically before, the all of us would, you know, set up a bunch of synthesizers and pedals and like pre-program some drum tracks and things like that, and noise, and just filter it, and we'd have fun with that in the studio. And then live, like, we would just do our best to play something off of a loop station, or, you know, have like our bassist Justin was at that point like just like primarily vocals, so he would have the ability to play more samples live. But we were just like at a point where we decided we really can get so much more out of this band, and we would do so much better with having a full-time member devoted to the electronic elements. And oddly enough, we met Adam through like moonlighting as a Nine Inch Nails cover band. And that was another like collective influence for the music. So like we learned sort of how to make playable samples and textures and everything work for us without having to commit, like making it still feel like organic. They're pushing buttons, they're playing something, they're hitting something without like the whole band is just playing along to something through an earpiece, backing track kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, I think like if I take Leaden Tomb, for example, which I absolutely love, I think that's such an amazing track. I think that's a really good example of how you do have these elements that I guess are programmed. Like I'm assuming that at the beginning, the like that drum bit at the beginning is programmed, and then you've got the live drumming afterwards. I think it goes together very cohesively. Like there are these bits that sound industrial and programmed, but it's, to your point, it's not kind of like the whole thing. It's not, I mean, I love Godflesh, but it's like with Godflesh, you know that they're programmed drums the whole time, apart from whatever, like one album where they had a live drummer.
Yeah.
How complicated is it to incorporate those two elements together? Just like, I'm thinking, you mentioned looping pedals. How do you have a looping pedal, but also have drumming as well? Are you playing with a click? Like, how does all of that kind of fit together?
No click right now.
Yeah, no click.
Trust and prayer, you know, just eye contact and making sure we can hear each other. But there's it's kind of fun. There's a danger to it that I think we all kind of implicitly like just took on, where it's like, okay, here's your tempo, you know, here's your beat, and let's just not fall off of it. But we don't use in-ears quite yet as a default. So it's, at least for me, it's sort of dangerously fun to just say, okay, there's the riff, like there's the riff, here's the motif or what have you. After X amount of things, we're gonna come in and and we'll see. But that looseness kind of forces people to hear each other, if that makes sense. So that's, you know, the short answer, no click tracks yet.
Yeah, it's I guess there's like sort of when we're writing the song, we decide like, okay, we want to either start off or go into this part that like the drums will drop out, and then we'll go to like a sampled drum track, and then start building things on top of it. I think a good example is like the first song, Flesh Dirge. You know, it starts out with like a programmed track, but then once the drums kick in, Adam has like hand playable percussive samples and drum samples that he'll just use to sort of augment what's going on the drums, and not have to like everyone be listening to a click track with an earpiece. I mean, maybe someday it will go that direction for like a song or two. We've discussed that, but for this record, at the current moment, it's all just, you know, we're just playing like a regular band with some percussive elements that are just added.
Well, I think it does. Yeah, it gives you a particular kind of sound, that's sort of the organic element of, like, I think when I was listening to the album before, I was sort of thinking it's kind of like a fight between machine and something organic, and I really like that. There's a certain kind of like violence.
Yeah, and I guess it kind of breaks the default, as Pete was saying it. I kind of realized is like, when you think of like, okay, you have in like hierarchy, you have like the click track for a lot of bands. You have a lot of, you know, you have the click track, drums, right, you know, adjacent or underneath it, and then everybody else. But as Pete's pointing out, it's like one thing that's nice is that that's definitely a non-default to have. It's almost like, imagine it like a jazz band or something, is like, well, your rhythm is not just the drums, it's everybody's collective consciousness about where the beat is, and everybody follows that. And it can who is the conductor or the prime mover in a given moment in a song can change, rather than it always being the same top down. Well, it's the click, everything else. And I appreciate that that you pointed that out, because there is that give and take. And sometimes, not to be the guy to say like all of insert music genre is insert opinion, but a lot of times I think you can hear that sort of sterility that comes with having that template always be the use case, you know. But it's fun it's fun, and it actually speaks stories sometimes, you know, more detail, or gives you more sort of visual or auditory stimuli in terms of like musical storytelling, to have that back and forth, that imperfect, you know, unspoken conversation going on.
Yeah, like I think that's kind of a thing that I don't necessarily say puts me off, but a limitation I feel sometimes with kind of straight death metal is I feel like sometimes it's sort of obsessed with the technicality of it. So you do end up having things feeling like it's a little bit too regimented, and there's no sort of freedom from that. I like the sense of something a bit raw, or the sense that like chaos could descend at any moment,
Right.
even if it doesn't. I do want to get a bit more into specifics of some of the tracks, but I also wanted to just touch on one other thing first. So your debut, Beyond the Infinite, came out in 2017. What were the reasons for the big gap?
Well, besides a global pandemic,
Apart from the universe collapsing.
we did go through some member changes. We did go through a bit of a universe collapse, and a lot of it too, just from a musical kind of quality, maybe reflected a lot of the shit that we had to kind of work through personally and as a band, growing up a little bit, having more responsibilities, having more shit going on. But we did have to rewrite, I don't want to say rewrite, but multiple times kind of approach carefully, cautiously, and with kindness a track, you know, maybe the third or the fourth time together, and say, what are we really going to fucking do with this song? How are we really going to make it work? But multiple things kind of kept us having to continue poking and prodding and figuring out what worked. I'm not sure. What do you think, Pete? Is there like a specific one answer to that, right? It's just kind of, some of the tracks took longer than others. In a couple of cases, we had to rewrite them, or just say, well, what if we, you know, maybe rearrange them, graft one part onto another.
Yeah, we did that a couple times.
Yeah, you just sort of realize, oh, like this riff would actually flow much better here. This is more what we're trying to communicate. It's kind of funny we're talking about this now, because I hadn't revisited any old demos from this stuff in years. Because you get to that point where you have product and you're like, okay, we're finally fucking done. I don't ever want to think about having to touch the tracking or the recording files or any of this ever again. And then you separate from it. But just like in the past day or two, for a friend, she had asked, do you have any demos? I'd love to hear them. That's some of my favorite stuff to hear. So we went back and I found a couple demos and I just shared them with her. But it's just fascinating to hear them again and just go like, dear Lord, like this turned into that. Like, and some of these demos are from 2017, 2018, right?
Wow.
So you can really hear prototypes of what was going on. But
yeah, so that answered my next question, which was going to be how far back some of these demos go. So basically, at the point that you released the first album, you were already starting to work on the next stuff.
Pretty much, yeah. We had 2 or 3 songs. I think Pete had a couple of riffs ready to kind of go, and then we had just kind of continued to push on some of them. And yeah, you'll hear like, I want to say that like Flesh Dirge had something that in it for a while that maybe, this isn't even authoritative, but you can just imagine like, what if a part of Flesh Dirge led into a part from Led Into, something like this. It just, now you would picture that and you'd be like, oh, okay, you know, different songs, what? But we're also lucky because we have other musical projects. We also have a hell of a lot of patience. And when you know each other over a long period of time, there's a degree of familiarity that can make you kind of have moments of frustration with each other, but there's also a degree of trust that it's hard to have with not necessarily, you're not going to necessarily have with every musical project. So I definitely implicitly trust the hell out of Pete and everybody else in the band. But the reason I'm saying that is because there were absolutely times where we had to, at least for me, I had to be like, I just got to trust it'll turn out like something that we like and where we want to go, you know?
And on the topic of the vocals and the lyrics, so Pete, you're sharing vocals with your other guitarist Dan and your bass player Justin, is that right?
Yes, I'm one of 3 vocalists on this record.
And I guess that's sort of another loose Neurosis association? Because, you know, like at different eras of Neurosis, you could maybe say that one or other of them was like the lead vocalist, so to speak. Do you consider yourself to be the main vocalist? Is there a main vocalist, or is that kind of like really an even split for the band?
I don't think there's a lead vocalist. I have not looked at the record, and I mean, I guess on this record, if you literally like time clocks all of my vocals versus everyone else, there might be slightly more of mine on this record, but it is like a a collaboration between the three of us. uh I would say for like the last two tracks, Entity and Nano Death, Dan Finn, the other guitar player, mostly handled the vocals and the lyrics and the structure of those songs, but the others were mostly Justin and I writing all of the lyrics.
Okay, so as well as sharing the vocals, you're also sharing the lyric writing.
Yes.
On that topic, I mean, we mentioned Lead and Tomb, so I wanted to ask you about what that refers to, but maybe you could also say in general, kind of what are the lyrical concerns of the album and the band in general?
Well, I'm only speaking as to what my lyrics are and my understanding of all of the lyrics on the record.
Sure.
But for Lead and Tomb, it was primarily about the environment is kind of collapsing slowly throughout the world, and it's all due to sort of like global capitalism. I mean, this is like a very embellished like explanation of very simple lyrics, I guess, but it's there's sort of like forces of leadership and the ruling class throughout the world that they cause sort of like a butterfly effect with things like that. And I don't know, I guess then it also just, my lyrics generally, it's like it's angry, aggressive, violent music. So when I go to sit down to write the lyrics, I'm just like, what makes me feel angry? And it's generally, I reuse a lot of the same subject matter. Like, it's just like we human beings treat each other horribly, and there's just like systems in place that seem like insurmountable or unchangeable that we just can't seem to break out of. And I'm not a nihilist every day, and I don't want it to be the end of the world. But it just, that's just how I'm feeling when writing some of the songs. And I don't even really like, I'm not the smartest person ever or the best lyricist ever. I just do the best I can, and that's like the emotions that I'm dealing with. And like I can't not be have terrible anxiety every time I look at any sort of news or anything. And it's definitely like people have been doing it forever with punk and metal lyrics, but I just don't know any better.
I wonder, is this kind of like the crust aspect to have sort of socially politically aware lyrics? Because I feel like it's not really a part of death metal, if we can generalize like that. Maybe it's also an industrial thing as well. Do you sort of see that as being sort of distinct for genres?
Yeah, I mean, as I connect more personally. I mean, not all the songs are very political. Some of them go into like a more, I want to say, like fantastical sci-fi ideas that aren't overtly political or anything like that. But me personally, I've just always been influenced by like a lot of the UK crust bands of the 90s and like hardcore bands of that time period, like, or, you know, like Napalm Death, or just, you know, like what am I going to sing about? I don't, you know, like, I'm not very good personally at trying to make abstract poetic lyrics work, or a lot of the, I mean, I love like traditional death metal subject matter of like, you know, it doesn't have to say anything. It can just be like, you know, artistic like impression of death and guts and murder and stuff. But like,
Sung in the traditional style.
yeah. But you know, I'm not good. It's just like doesn't come as naturally to me with lyrics.
Going back into the sound of the album, and you touched on Flesh Dirge before, and also you touched on Nine Inch Nails before, because I think that beginning of Flesh Dirge with the sort of screaming or yelling, whatever it is, I can't work out if it's people or animals. You can maybe reveal that. And I think that seems to be maybe not the same sample, but there are a few tracks where there is that kind of sound in the background. What is that? And yeah, what was who brought that into the music?
John Carmack and John Romero, partially, a little bit.
That's
So
one
there's
of
a little bit of doom in there. There's a little bit of doom in there. Yeah.
I don't want to get us into trouble.
Only reveal what you're comfortable revealing.
I mean, there are some heavily doctored film samples and sort of recreations of certain things. But yeah, I mean, I also like Adam would be the one to answer that question better than I could, because he pretty much took the reins on that song. But yeah, there are some doom screams, and it's from a lot of different source material, but it's like processed to the point where it's just I don't know, it's like it's kind of like been sort of digitally reborn, or in a way.
I remember that 6 month. There was like a 6 month golden period where once Adam was, I think, feeling comfortable, you know, being officially in the band and like having regular practices. And there was, I don't know if you remember, Pete, but there was like something like 4 to 6 months where we'd come into practice every week and he'd be like, "Hey guys, check this out." And then for like 30 minutes, he'd like play. So I took like, this isn't, you know, to set an example, he'd be like, "So I took the intro from The Long Goodbye," not actually happened, but I took the intro and I stretched the one vocal sample that is said in this part, and then he plays it back for us, and we're just hearing this murmuring or something like this over a song we've, you know, been playing for 10 years, and then suddenly you just hear this. It kind of honestly reminds me of the way Adam approached it, the effect that he would get a lot of times, where it's sort of like if you hear like a little bit of noise or a little bit of imagined music in your head when you're starting to trip or something like this. It kind of does that. It almost creates this like extra layer of, is that my brain imagining things, or is that implicit overtones that are coming out of the track and I'm just hearing them? And but yeah, there was a period of time where Adam was just, we'd show up and he'd have, you know, 3 little miniature mastercrafts of samples that he'd be like excited to share with us.
That's very cool. On the topic of samples, I also wanted to ask you about Entity, because midway through that track, you've got this great break with this ghostly voice narrating. And again, only if you can tell me, is this a sample or what is this?
Yeah, it is. That's another one that Dan picked. The subject matter, as I understand of that song, is like the creation of AI and like pseudo sentient, like aware intelligence, and like the blurring of the line between like what separates human consciousness versus machine consciousness, sort of declaring that people are basically algorithms in the way they behave. Like you can predict en masse sort of like social trends and like what makes us like more of a, like, are we more deserving of something than like say like a artificially made being would be? Like what makes, what has more of a right to life or whatever, I guess.
That is a very current topic. I want to ask you a slightly frivolous question. So you obviously make music that, well, I say obviously, I hate the word obviously. I try to avoid using the word obviously. It appears that you play music that is pretty difficult to play. Who's got the hardest job in the band?
Joel.
Maybe. Yeah, it might be me.
The most physical job in the band belongs to Joel for sure. I mean, Adam has a hard job in terms of he has to create textures and sounds and process things and make the instrumentation that isn't just like, oh, I'm holding a guitar and this comes out of it with this pedal or whatever, or like I'm hitting a drum and it makes this noise. But I would say, I mean, in my opinion, it's you, Joel.
Yeah, probably. If we're counting calories or kinetic energy, yeah, it's probably me.
Well, kind of an extension of that topic, Joel, are there any tracks on the album that you found particularly challenging to get down in the recordings, or like, you know, any tracks
Definitely.
that you're thinking, shit, this is going to be hard to play live when you're touring?
Yes, 100%. Lead and Tomb went surprisingly well, but I will say that Pete and Danny it was me, it was myself, Pete and Danny when we did that specific take, and I'll always vividly remember getting mad at that one, which I think anybody that spends time in the studio will have that experience at some point where you hit the wall and you don't know what to do. And I got really pissed off and I was just sort of malding. I was sitting there for just 5 seconds, 10 seconds, just sort of power pouting. And I look up and just remember Pete and Danny just going, just keep it simple. Just keep it really, just play it super simple. And then the very next take was the one that made the album. So that was tricky. That one wasn't too bad though. That was just one of those specific little, you know, you can remember that you hit the wall and then you got over it. I really have a lot of affection for every song on this album. I also particularly love and always am a little bit intimidated to play Nanodeath, the last song on the record. And there's if you listen to the ending, it's sort of a rotation of blasting. And honestly, I'm self-taught on drums, so there was I was like a little bit apprehensive about just committing that to tape, because I think everybody feels a certain way about their take or their track on a given record. And I'm proud of that take. But I'll admit and confess that I didn't quite have a clear understanding of how I wanted to play the pattern on the end there. And since then, I've probably kind of refined a little bit of technique and a little bit of knowledge in the world of blasting. But I don't consider myself, Sammy Latva or anybody who's just like on the top of their game like that. But I just love that song because it's right on the edge, and I really like when music allows for that. If you can play on the edge of your ability, but still tell that story, and if you can kind of share, there's a vulnerability to it that I think is really interesting, and it kind of takes you as far into a detail of concept as you want to go with it, right? And it's very much like it reminds me of jazz a little bit, where how far do you want to go? How far can you go? What do you want to say? How much room is there for you to say what you want to say? How clearly can you say what you want to say with just a few elements? That kind of stuff. I could talk all day about that stuff, but Nanodeath was tricky. Short answer. Yeah.
And to that point of the difficulty of certain elements, and also, you know, what we've talked about with the layers and the combinations of the programming and the live playing.
Mhm.
How much room is there for improvisation when you're playing live?
There's definitely, it's that kind of thing where I was thinking and discussing trust before. Um, Pete and Danny, Justin and Adam, all trust me in a way that I have to have when I play music with people. We don't hold each other really ever to this part must be played this way. Um, you know, there's such a good amount of there's such a an amount of good faith in it that they know that I'm not gonna go off and go, hey guys, I superimposed this 6/8 shuffle thing over top of this riff because I was bored one day and I want to do. But they know that I'm going to look for other avenues, right, and other ways to deliver just something as simple as like 4 beats of a fill. A section of music where there's double bass and a ride, but you know what, on this one I'm going to do this little kind of switch up pattern, but the double bass is still going, things like this. And I think that, like, going back to some of the first questions that we were kind of discussing, is like that's maybe an element of punk that is really great to have, like, whereas kind of like, as you alluded to earlier, maybe and not to straw man a whole musical genre, this is always fun, but in, let's say you're a death metal band and you're traditionally just, you know, right down the line death metal, maybe there's going to be kind of that unspoken agreement that in most of these tracks, like, this is the riff, this is the drums, this is the bass, and we're going to execute as high as we can, right? And I think that there is absolutely quality and there's absolutely value in that, but maybe our natural kind of organic pull, like, to whatever kind of vibe that we have when we all get together as Prisoner, is maybe a little more punk, maybe a little more jazz. Is like, we want to communicate a feeling, a story, like Pete was saying. And I think to do that, you're sort of injecting your experience, right? Maybe not you. It's like a difference between injection of ego versus injection of experience, maybe. And so I don't know. I think that, like, it speaks a lot to the trust that we kind of have and kind of the experiences we've had with each other, to just kind of look at a piece of a musical motif or a riff and look at it for its potential and not for its explicit requirements, if that makes sense. What can we do with this? What could be communicated about this? And maybe not, what is the right way to do this? You know, I think that kind of stifles creativity. Whereas if you kind of ask questions and kind of almost make a game of it, kind of like, you can come away with something that's unexpected, but maybe even better than what you would want. I guess, if that makes sense. A lot of times when people want something that's normal and understandable, and I'm not going to say it's rote or it's boring, but if baby want Binky, how many of us want Binky? You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of us do. So I kind of like how music can make you see things that you would never have seen before. You just have to kind of let go of certain stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I enjoyed the top 10 bands. I forget exactly what the title, top 10 bands that mixed industrial music and metal music, that you did with, was it Idiot EQ? Is that the name of the publication?
I'm not sure how to pronounce
It's
it.
either Idiot EQ or Idiot Tech.
Yeah.
Oh, that could work. Maybe it's supposed to have a double meaning. So you included the collaboration between Neurosis and Jarbo, which I also love, and just, even though no one's going to see it, but I do have the the vinyl, silver and black vinyl, and I love. Well, I mean, we've talked about Neurosis, but I love Jarbo as well. I think she's absolutely amazing. She's actually she's the number one person that I want to interview, basically. So I'm hunting down the opportunity to talk to Jarbo. But
I really do.
Yeah.
Get that.
Yeah,
it would be super. And my thank you. And my thing is, I'm gonna, if I do get to interview her, I'm not gonna ask her any questions about Swans, because, you know, I love Swans, but that's, everyone asks her questions about Swans. I want to know about all the different solo material. Anyway, that's a side thing. But it got me thinking: are there any artists, any bands that you would like to collaborate with as Prisoner?
Yeah.
Wow, I wasn't ready for that one. Um,
Who would we collaborate with, Pete? The problem is we've only got so much room in our practice space, so it's more a question of logistics.
yeah,
I think it'd be cool to. I definitely think that we could do something maybe as a sort of a through composed soundtrack. It wouldn't be surprising if we wound up maybe doing something like that. But
yeah, I would love to. I would like to leave that a kind of open answer because nothing, no specific one name is coming to mind now, but I do like the idea of having guest vocalists and
mm,
synth or electronics players that, have come to be good artists within their own right. Um, I kind of feel like that's how maybe, I don't know exactly how that collaboration between Neurosis and Jarbo came to be. I'm sure I could look it up or whatever, but maybe we'll have an answer to that question in sooner, near future. But I'm very open to the idea of collaboration. I feel like it works very well for a lot of like Thou and Full of Hell and The Body. Those bands all do those things, and a lot of
Mm.
times it works very well.
another band that comes to mind. I'm glad you mentioned both of those because as soon as you were saying that, I was also picturing is Boris because of maybe not collaboration, though they do that, but like a lot of
Yeah.
reconfiguration, right? Like when Pete and I saw Boris I think most recently we saw them a couple years ago in DC. And before that, we've both seen them several times in all over the world, basically. And every time you go see Boris, it's different, uh, pretty much. Wata is still absolute goddess, but somebody might be joining them on drums, somebody might be filling in, so that's we get specific vocals. Like I think the reconfiguration, as much as the collaboration, is it's like a very holistic way of looking at it, and I think that's attractive too, because with that can come, oh cool, we have this sixth person for a tour or for a small run of shows or something like that. I'm super open to it too. There's not maybe a specific person so much as a vibe that I think that we all kind of appreciate when we see things like that.
That's cool. It's like we're letting the universe know you're projecting the psychic energy of being open to whatever's going to come, and then
There
you're
it
just going to
is.
see what happens.
Right. Right.
Again, maybe a slightly frivolous question. So, you play this really intense music. It's very heavy. It's very aggressive. There's a lot of dark and apocalyptic themes. But I wonder when you're all together, like let's say when you're on tour or you've been, rehearsing a lot, is there some kind of like levity or fun or humor to be had in that? It's like, to go back to Neurosis, I guess those guys must laugh sometimes, but I always find it hard to imagine them not being serious.
Like imagine being like, "Hey guys, can we jump in the tour bus from here to the next show?" And you jump in, and everyone's just sitting there stoically, just ponderous. And
That's what I
yeah, no,
imagine.
I'm sure they're normal people just like us.
So where's the fun and the humor for you guys within Prisoner? Because I kind of imagine you sort of need that as well. Otherwise, it would get overbearingly heavy.
It's always fun, and we're always, I mean, like for the most part, we're smiling ear to ear. And because no matter how dark the subject matter or the vibe of the music can get, it's always like a positive thing, at least for me, to be able to play, to be able to get that hateful energy out. Uh,
Cathartic.
and it unifies you with the audience. It's like I've seen bands and it's their whole thing is that like they're supposed to be depressive and like not crack a smile on stage as part of their act or something. But like for me, it's like I mean, like if I feel that way, I'm gonna look that way. But like we're all ourselves as a band, we don't purport some sort of like cloud of anger around us all the time. It's really like we're very happy to have this band, and it's very good for all of us, like our mental health and everything. So it's not like it. I maybe get a little deep in depression and anxiety when physically like sitting down with pen and paper and trying to flush out the lyrics, because I'm just trying to dig into that. Or, you know, when we're writing, you sort of like try to open up every emotional door that you can to get the most out of everything. But when we're just hanging out on tour, like we're having a great time, you know.
Between the occasional guys I'm afraid hold me and guys I'm gonna shit myself, please pull over.
Yeah.
It's always nothing but smiles.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. You know, it's like I like to listen to a lot of intense extreme music, but it's also nice to know that the artists that I admire aren't too tortured all of the time. You know, I do ultimately want people to be happy. So
Same.
we've talked about live shows a bit now. So as I say, this is going to come out on Tuesday, and I believe your next live date is going to be on the 13th of March. Can you say a bit about what you've got lined up in terms of shows?
Yeah, we're about to go on a tour for a little over a week with our friends Listless. It's like friends of ours from Richmond. We're very excited about. We're starting off here in Richmond on Wednesday, and then doing sort of a quick southeastern United States trip and then back up to Richmond. I guess that show is sort of our release show. It's at Fallout in Richmond. It's us, Listless, and a band Parasite Sentence. That's like a cool, strictly industrial band from Richmond. And then after that, we embark on the tour with Listless. So we'll have the records with us on that trip, which is very exciting.
And on that topic of the record itself, so if I remember right, there's going to be like a colored vinyl pressing. What are the formats of the album that you're going to have available for people, and what's the best way for people to get hold of them apart from being at shows?
For right now, if you want to order the LP or really any of our merch, you can get the LP from Persistent Vision Records, and you can also go to our Bandcamp page. It's just prisoner.bandcamp.com, and that has a link to everything. You know, it's on tape, 12-inch vinyl, and digital, and it'll be on streaming platforms, I believe, on the 15th.
Also available on Death Wish.
Oh yeah, and Death Wish for European customers.
And on the topic of European customers, fans, interested parties, is there a possibility that you might make it over to Europe?
God, we hope so as soon as possible. Yes, there's a possibility we make it to Europe as soon as we can. Yeah, and Japan.
Nothing on the books at the moment, but we're making plans for that, definitely.
Nice. And in terms of people keeping up to date with plans, what's the best way for people to do that?
Our Instagram, definitely our Instagram is our main social media, and our Bandcamp. We've stepped up our game with publishing and staying up to date with the goings on of the band. So definitely the Instagram, definitely the Bandcamp. Those are the first two things I would recommend. And now with Paul having Persistent Vision backing us, that's been really, really great because it just helps to kind of consolidate and unify everything. But I would say those two things, maybe, Pete.
Yeah, definitely the Prisoner Instagram and the Persistent Vision Instagram will have all of our shows and flyers posted before we play.
We also started using that, what is the set list website? Like whatever that Adam's been.
Yeah, I forget what it
It's just like such a funny new phenomenon, setlist.com or something like that.
I've seen this before.
Yeah.
Like I just kind of stumble across it randomly from time to time.
Yeah, Google will just index you a result on that one, and you're looking at it, and suddenly an hour later, you're like, "Wait a minute, they played that song back in 2000." It's just, yeah, it's kind of cool. I mean, the concept is cool. It's just one of those things that I've seen recently where I'm like, I kind of like this. Like, this is weird, but kind of great. Online journal of what we did.
I'm all for that kind of nerdish information. I want to know what tracks Swans were playing when they were touring in 1992.
Right. Yeah, totally. And it's easy. It's just text. That's what the internet was born for. Here's just a list of stuff.
Yeah.
Look at it or don't.
And your Instagram handle, because I guess you couldn't just get Prisoner. What is it? It's Prisoner 804 or something like that?
It's the area code for our associated phone number.
Right. Then that makes sense. Well, Pete, Joel, thank you so much. It was great to talk to you. It was great to get your insights.
Same, Tom. Thank you very much, man, for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
My absolute pleasure. And yeah, have a great tour. Have a great show on the 13th. And I hope the release goes fantastically. All the best.
Thank you, Tom.
I appreciate it. Thank you.